Without further ado, let's get to our keynote speaker. At AS, we're doing our best to have a complementary and diverse set of speakers at our events, and this is a prime example of that, I think. Dr. Gillian Bussey, the Deputy Chief Science Officer at the United States Space Force, is a federal science and technology leader. Dr. Bussey most recently worked as an analyst at the Office of the Secretary of Defense's Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, or CAPE. In this capacity, she was the lead analyst for science and technology issues. She received her Bachelor of Science from MIT and her Doctorate of Aerospace Engineering right nearby here at the University of Maryland. With that, welcome, Dr. Bussey.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So I have a slide deck to show. I'm going to continue with a lot of what's been said today about the importance of science and technology. I'm going to talk about it from a Space Force perspective, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about what the Space Force is. All right, next. So when we invest in science and technology, we understand that not everything is going to pan out. But we do know with absolute certainty that if we don't invest in science technology, technology will remain stagnant, which also means that our warfighting capabilities, our ability to defend the nation, our space exploration, and our economy will also stagnate. I know many of you understand the importance of S&T, so I'm going to be preaching to the choir a little bit with this talk. But I think this is an important conversation to have right now. We've historically seen this constant tension between the near-term needs or threats, or at NASA, you would call them operations or missions, and then our long-term needs. And since the end of the Cold War, particularly in the Department of Defense, these have not been always aligned. And for right or wrong, we've often chosen to push off science and technology or push off our future force to meet those near-term needs. And so this has been reflected in declining budgets from the federal government for S&T. And this is, a conversation that is very relevant right now. We heard earlier about the possibility of a 50% cut to NASA science. Within the department, we are facing budget cuts to S&T. And the ironic thing is that this is being done to deal with the very near-term threat posed by a potential adversary that has become a potential adversary and a threat because they've watched how we've invested in S&T and they've seen the impact it's had on our warfighting capability, particularly the Gulf War, the war on terror, and how it's affected our economy. And a lot of those investments have in particular been in space. So I hope to give many of you some ammunition as you try and advocate, defend what you do in the realm of federally funded space S&T. So next slide. Why do we have a Space Force? We often get asked this question, so I'm going to address it up front. So it's a branch of the U.S. military that was established December 20th, 2019. The creation of the Space Force was a response to the growing importance of space as a domain for military operations with a mandate to organize, train, and equip space forces in order to protect and defend U.S. interests in space and the space capabilities that enable and enhance the lethality of the joint force. It was also to be able to more efficiently coordinate space operations for the joint services. So the Space Force operates and maintains U.S. space-based assets, satellites, ground-based systems. It develops and acquires new space-based capabilities, which obviously depends on healthy S&T investments. It conducts space operations, launch and on-orbit operations, provides space-based support to other military branches and government, and then it develops and implements space policy and strategy. So it's a critical component to the U.S. military. One could argue that the rest of the joint force cannot operate without the Space Force. So its establishment really reflects the growing importance of space as a domain for military operations and the need to protect U.S. interests in this domain. So specifically to this audience, earlier we heard some discussions about some of the economic impacts of Earth observation data from NASA. I think the number was 3.1 or 3.6 trillion is projected. Currently, about a little under $1 trillion. And then 74% of Fortune 500 companies are using NASA Earth observation data. While these are not military assets, there are multiple capabilities. You can read about them from senior leaders who've made statements about what Russia and China are doing, that these capabilities are indiscriminate in their effect, and they are wide-ranging. And so, again, while your satellites are not military, they are absolutely also under threat. And so the Space Force is there to not just protect our troops, but the science that you all do and the data and the capabilities that our economy depends on. Next slide. So to kind of continue along that thread, the importance of space is highlighted here across a continuum from peace to conflict, or to competition to conflict. So we leverage space across all instruments of national power, economic, information, diplomacy, military. We benefit from space for communications, financial networks, public safety, weather monitoring, transportation, scientific exploration, and more. One of the systems that the Space Force operates that you all use, and I see many of you using right now with your phones, is the Global Positioning System, GPS. Space allows us to anticipate threats and effectively project power globally. So fundamentally, being able to have space superiority, control space, and maintain our democratic norms and the rules-based order in space, that we need a very capable Space Force. Next slide. So the Space Force mission is to secure our nation's interests in, from, and to space. So breaking this down, the verb secure means to gain control over an objective with or without force, and thereby prevent its use or destruction by a hostile entity. Securing our nation's interests means protecting the security and prosperity the nation derives from space. And we have, immense interest in space. The phrase in, from, and to space refers to the core functions of the Space Force. So guardians, which is what we call our warfighters, secure our nation's interests in space, provide capabilities from space, and must ensure we can launch and access our satellites, whether launch systems or via radio frequency links. So that's to space. Our motto means always above, and this is a nod to our domain. We operate in, to, and from, and is physically above all the other physical domains. So in military doctrine and theory, we talk about having the higher ground. Space is the ultimate higher ground. Go to the next slide. So here's a brief history of space operations. We see the first U.S. satellite launch in 1958. We see in 1960 our first strategic reconnaissance capability. This is a capability identified by Air Force pioneers and space pioneers Hap Arnold and Bernard Schriever. So we had our first mission August 18th, 1960 with Corona. By 1982, it became evident that the Air Force needed a separate space command, and that this was a theater of operations like any other. So we set up the Air Force Space Command. 1991 was really a pivotal year for space operations. This is when we had the confluence of multiple space capabilities that we were able to use together. So we had GPS that enabled precision targeting. We had satellites that enabled targeting information and real-time information about what's going on. And our adversaries took notice. They saw how effective we were in the Gulf War and how space enabled that. And then in 2019, we have the Space Force established. And you know, the Space Force was essentially established because we recognized that space was no longer a benign environment where we could essentially do what we want and where we were the only ones up there. So let's talk a little bit about, so next I'll talk about some of the technologies developed related to space over the years and how that's played a role in our maintaining a stable world order. So we'll go next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the key technologies that would not have been possible without U.S. investment in basic and applied research. So a key enabler of a key enabler of our leadership in the world order and our support to international institutions and norms has been a healthy investment in scientific research and development, which has fueled our economy and our military might and propelled our status as a global superpower. So these investments launched not only these technologies that you see above that define modern life, like the internet, mobile and personal computing, artificial intelligence, but also healthcare advances. So, you know, starting on the left, radar technology, you know, that was made possible by investments in things like electromagnetism, radio frequency technologies, microwave technologies, pulse modulation, antenna design, signal processing, vacuum, and cathode ray tube technologies. And then moving along to the 1950s to 1960s, the Deep Space Network. In order to realize that capability, we needed low noise amplifiers, advanced RF and microwave technology, tracking telemetry command systems, digital signal processing, cryogenic cooling, high performance computing, and so on. And then GPS, precision navigation and timing. We need an understanding of astrodynamics, general relativity, special relativity, signal processing, spacecraft systems engineering, orbit determination, time transfer. And then finally, you know, cybersecurity. You know, in order to have cybersecurity, we needed to discover internet protocol, cryptography, public key cryptography, firewalls, VPNs, etc. So, you know, these systems we rely on, they started from in some cases, very basic S&T, like, you know, GPS needed relativity in order to function properly. So speaking of GPS, we're going to deep dive a little bit on the next slide. So this was before my time. So this is the 1950s, 1960s. There was this television show called This Is Your Life, and they surprised a celebrity, brought their friends and family on and kind of showed them what their life was like. So we're going to talk a little bit about the life of GPS. So the story of GPS begins well before its launch. Back in the labs and minds of brilliant scientists, it started with the idea that we could, you know, pinpoint locations with pinpoint accuracy. So in the 1960s, the Navy needed a way to guide its submarines. So this led to the development of the transit system, which is GPS's distant ancestor, and it provided somewhat accurate location data. In the 1970s, the DoD took up the challenge to create a more accurate system, which was called Navstar. So there's a lot of research and development. At the heart of it lay atomic clocks, which, you know, depended on very basic research into the nature of the atom itself. But that timekeeping is just the beginning. The real magic to GPS lies in the integral dance of signals between our star and its brethren in orbit. This constellation, a symphony of radio waves, enables the magic of trilateration. Such feats would not have been possible without unsung heroes such as microprocessors. These tiny titans, evolving from room-sized behemoths to microscopic marvels, provide the computational power to process signals, calculate distances, and deliver your location with astonishing precision. And then finally, the unsung heroes on the ground. A network of tracking stations constantly monitors and fine-tunes the satellite constellation, ensuring the accuracy and integrity of the systems you all rely on. So from humble beginnings in military navigation, this S&T behind GPS has revolutionized countless industries. We go to the next slide. So just to talk a little bit briefly, part of the Space Force's technology vision is to be a digital service. We want to leverage advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, data analytics, and digital engineering so that we can have a highly agile, resilient Space Force capable of rapidly integrating innovative solutions and delivering warfighting capabilities quickly, while also utilizing and integrating commercial space technologies to enhance its overall capabilities. So we're aiming to be the first truly digital military branch with a focus on hybrid military commercial space architectures. So while you and NASA or at NOAA are grappling with how do we leverage commercial systems and the Space Force, we're trying to take advantage of those opportunities as well. Go to the next slide. So talking a little bit about S&T funding and the different types of S&T. So the chart, oh, I think we skipped a slide. Or did I skip a slide? Okay, never mind. All right, go to the next slide. I got my slides messed up in real life. All right, so this is sort of, okay, how does the Space Force identify future technologies? Where do we put our investments? So right now, we're in the process of formalizing that process. You may have seen things in the press about Space Futures Command that had been put on pause, to ensure that new leadership can provide their direction. But essentially, whatever that entity ends up being, if it's Space Futures Command, this process is going to be sort of how we think about what technologies we need. So we have an iterative process between technologists, strategists, analysts, and warfighters. We have Wargaming and the Space Warfare Analysis Center. They help determine what capabilities are needed in the future and how well new technologies will play in likely future scenarios, so we can determine where we invest. Forecasting allows us to see what future operating environments will be there in the future, how technology will affect it, and what technology trends present challenges or opportunities in the future. And the Space Force is a force that was born out of high technology, so we strive to be the most technical and have the most advanced technology within the DoD. Go to the next slide. All right. So looking at the chart, the pie graph on the left, so one thing to keep in mind is DoD is actually a very small percentage of the total U.S. Federal funding or total U.S. S&T investments. So we're not even half of the federally funded S&T investments. And when I say S&T, I'm talking about from 6.1 to 6.3. So you can see there, Department of Defense is 41.2%. NIH and kind of healthcare is a very large percentage of the other federally funded, but also NSF. And then when you look, and I don't have it here, you look at S&T funding trends over the last 50 years, we've seen less federally funded S&T compared to industry. And so that's kind of how you get where DoD is only 10% of that funding. Industry actually invests more in S&T than the federal government. For those of you who aren't, and that has clear implications as we develop strategies on how to incorporate commercial technologies and how we work with industry. I will say still, though, in industry is not spending money in 6.1. So 6.1 is your basic research that usually goes to universities. As mentioned earlier, industry is not going to, commercial is not going to do James Webb. Commercial is not going to invest in, fundamental properties of quantum sensing. If they don't see that there's a, financial incentive in, the next 5 to 10 years. And so industry depends very heavily on investments from DoD, NSF, NASA, to be able to be in a position to create things like the iPhone. So as an example, on your iPhone, you have a touch screen. That touch screen was the underlying technology was patented at the University of Delaware, and it was funded through the federal government. I believe the NSF, maybe the Department of Energy. And so, we have this great phone that does so many things, and there's so many basic research investments that go into this phone, from DARPA, from NSF, and people, they often forget that. Go to the next slide. So this is a little bit about how the Space Force is leveraging commercial. We've seen unprecedented innovation emerging in commercial and allied space systems over the past decade. I think a lot of that growth, fortunately, has been in the US and with our allies. And as a Space Force, the Vice Chairman of Space Operations, Lieutenant Gutlein, kind of summarizes what our philosophy is in terms of acquisition and R&D, which is, let's buy what we can and build what we must. There are certain things that industry is just not going to build that have really only a DoD purpose. Those are the things that we should be focusing our investments on. But there are other things like providing, communications globally that others are investing in, like SpaceX. Those are things that, we can maybe think about buying. Or commercial imagery. Companies like Planet are providing lots of commercial industry or providing lots of satellite imagery. Those are things that we can buy, or Maxar, other companies. So we're seeking to leverage innovative commercial space solutions that tap into American entrepreneurship, innovation, vibrant commercial markets. So we're going to take full advantage of these capabilities. We have a commercial space strategy. You can, look for it on the internet or use the QR code. We're trying to make sure that military standards and procedures should strengthen interoperability between government and commercial solutions so that we don't stifle that innovation, speed, or scale. And then have these standards and interfaces such that we can adopt these systems or facilitate integration where appropriate. And we believe that this will strengthen resilience by increasing the number of commercial providers, diversifying supply chains, and expanding the variety and number of solutions used. So, the Space Development Agency is a great example of this, in how they're increasing the number of commercial providers, providing standards and interfaces, diversifying supply chains. And then in terms of these acronyms, so the areas that we're looking at for commercial are space-based environmental monitoring. So I think that's a issue very relevant here. Tactical surveillance and reconnaissance, position, navigation and timing, space access and mobility and logistics, cyber, command and control, communications, and precision navigation and timing. Precision navigation and timing. All right, go to the next slide. We can go to the next one. So a way to think about 6-1, which is basic research, it's not sequential. And transition of 6-1 isn't always guaranteed, nor is it predictable. What happens with 6-1 is, you should take the example of basic research in raw materials. You may discover that in your research, there are entirely new areas that need to be looked at. And so you'll go back so you have new science fields, or you might discover, well, there's more 6-1 we need to do, or you might have multiple applied projects coming out of it. You get more STEM jobs, or you might get completely new technology as people from other disciplines get access to that information and think about it in different ways. My background has been primarily in high-speed aerodynamics, and I've found that really the more we find out in hypersonics, the more we realize we have to understand. So one great example is in the 1960s on the X-15, that was a NASA program. It's a liquid rocket-powered aircraft, manned aircraft. It had they did a flight test where they had a scramjet on a pylon that's an air-breathing hypersonic engine. And the idea was to test the scramjet propulsion. But what they didn't realize, and they learned, was that pylon produced the shockwave boundary layer interaction, and the pylon almost burned off. And shockwave boundary layer interaction is a 6-1, sort of 6-2 area that we've been working on for about 50 years. So, doing that kind of research to find out one thing, we open up a whole new area of other things. If you go to the next slide. So here are some areas we are investing in academia and government-funded laboratories to support the Space Force. Just a sampling. So we got autonomy, photonics, quantum technologies, human-machine interfaces, energy and engineered materials, astrodynamics, bio-inspired. Like the bio-inspired is kind of referring to like sensors and sort of animal like bee eyes, insect eyes, digital twins. We're particularly interested in autonomy and we're interested in autonomy and AI because the Space Force is quite small, but there's a lot we need to do. There's a lot of things in space that we need to track. And so if we can kind of reduce the burden that operators have to face and automate as much as possible what the satellites are doing, what the ground stations are doing, what the screens are displaying, the algorithms going on in the background, so that we can free up our human operators to do what humans do best, which is think creatively, innovate, and make decisions. So that's just one example. I don't have a list of Space Force priorities because I mentioned earlier that process that we go through to figure out where we should invest. We have not stood up Space Futures Command or something else if it's going to be something else. So we don't have that process in place yet. So if I give you a list of priorities, they're not fully backed by a rigorous process and they could change. But we do know things like AI and autonomy are a high priority. Go to the next slide. So why do we need S&T? Why do we need S&T in academia and government, industry? Fundamentally, it drives economic growth. It improves our quality of life. It drives innovation. I mentioned the iPhone, but there's so many other examples that we all could come up with. Provides for national security. The reason why we are a free nation and have the security that we do is because of the S&T that we have, and being an S&T leader. It improves global stability, builds capacity. Go to the next slide. And finally, it's important in these times when everybody's budget is being looked at and we all have to tighten our belts a little bit, that we make sure we buy in. We get buy-in for the importance of S&T for national security. And I know many of you are you're not DoD. You're NASA or you're supporting NASA, but the work that you're doing is also very important to DoD. I mentioned we're a small force. Our budgets are small. Our S&T budgets are going down. So we're trying to do the best we can to, that's the second point. Leverage our partnerships. There are some things that NASA does very well that the Space Force and the Air Force Research Lab probably shouldn't invest in because we're not going to be as good as you guys, and we're going to, duplicate your investments. So things like space weather or robotics, which was shown earlier, figure out how can we leverage what you're doing and adopt it for our purposes. And then finally, by investing in S&T, we're fostering a healthy and relevant commercial sector. All this, commercial that we're leveraging, that exists because the government invested in basic and applied research. So with that, I'll take questions.
Hello, Rita Wilcoxon, Leidos. Since you're new and you don't really have a process yet, seems like it would be a good time to talk to NASA and maybe some of the other federal agencies about how could you form maybe like a tri-program to talk about technologies for different things that you could invest in. No one agency would really manage the budget, right? But you would talk about things that you could fund, in I guess in a discussion forum. In other words, NASA, you fund weather and we might give this much money towards it, and you work together with these tight budgets. I think we're going to have to do some things like that where we look at technology across multiple federal applications and figure out how to work together to fund them. Have you considered anything like that?
Yeah, so I guess we have two things like that. The first is an S&T partnership. We meet once a month, I think once every quarter in person, between NASA, NOAA, and the Space Force, to have those conversations. There's a couple areas that we've decided that we're going to work on together, or deconflict. And some of the areas I mentioned earlier are some of them. But with the cuts to the Office of Technology Science at the NASA headquarters, those were the people we were working with. So it's not clear what the future is for that engagement, who we're going to be, partnering with, because we want to, get at the NASA headquarters level, for those conversations. Another forum that we use is there's an interagency forum headed by the White House to look to kind of coordinate national security space research. The individual leading that has moved back to the DoD, so it's kind of stalled. But based on the points that you made and the need to, in light of tightening budgets and increased scrutiny to really coordinate and not duplicate, I think drives us to make sure that we can reinvigorate those forums and also to try and see if we can have those budget conversations as well.
Hello, and thanks for the talk, Ryan Udell from Future Space Leaders in Boeing. I work right now with one of the engagement with industry from Space Force. Wonderful worker, really cool to see more insight into the United States Space Force. Is there any sort of planned program, maybe for the reverse of industry, to gain a better understanding of like the acquisition process, how USSF is thinking about these things, so we can get a better understanding of how it all works?
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's a common question that smaller companies have in particular, or folks in Silicon Valley who are non-traditional suppliers. There are organizations within the Space Force and the Department of Defense that kind of help some of those companies. So the Defense Innovation Unit, they're all about getting to Silicon Valley. They go to Austin, Boston, places where innovation is happening with non-traditional suppliers, and they give them funding and they kind of help them understand the DoD and help them tailor what they're doing such that the DoD can absorb it. And then we have organizations like SpaceWorks, which is sort of a DIU for the Space Force, and they do a lot of a similar function. They do a lot of the SBIRs, which is the Small Business Innovation Research. I'm not, SBIRs, but companies want, they want more of a foot in the door than what those kind of programs can provide. The Space Systems Command, which is the acquisition arm of the Space Force, has something they call Front Door, which is a way for companies, and again, it's usually smaller companies, because companies like Boeing, have armies of people who understand the acquisition process, and people with Pentagon access who go knocking on doors. But the smaller companies, the things like the Front Door, it's a way to pitch a proposal and to get your foot in the door, to try and understand the acquisition process and get your ideas in front of acquisition people. Space Development Agency has something similar. It's called the TAP Lab. So there's ways, and the department, both the Space Force and DoD writ large, is trying to do better to make sure that our non-traditional suppliers and even academics can get their technologies to us.
a round of applause. And that concludes day 2 of our Goddard Symposium. Thank you again to all of our sponsors. We truly appreciate it. Thank you to NASA Goddard, of course. Thank you to our wide ranging planning committee. And we will see you all back here tomorrow morning. Again, networking breakfast at 8 a.m. We'll have our sessions from 9 to 12:30 and our luncheon keynote, Mark Clampin, at tomorrow's luncheon. So that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Safe travels.